Academic Pillars of Physicians Forum of India. Sir has been doing yeoman service along with Dr. J.P.S. Tulsi for the forum, and I give it to Dr. Daga sir to take the CME forward. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to welcome you for continuous, uninterrupted CME number 933 over last 20 years.
Dear friends, thank you Dr. Chauhan, thank you Physician Forum of India to give me yet another chance to moderate a session. So to be very frank, I had spent a lot of time how I will introduce my first talk, which is now cancelled. It was about gene sequencing, next generation gene sequencing. So I spent a lot of time in convincing myself how I will introduce this topic to my friends. So just to give you a glimpse, I had prepared that when you scan a QR code to pay UPI, nothing is written, just a QR code, and you come to know whom to go, money kisko ja rahi hai, kitni ja rahi hai, and also the billing section in most of the malls. You they scan it and it comes. Which product, what cost, what is the date of production and expiry, whatever. So I had prepared a lot about that, and I would have taken at least 10 minutes. Now that that part is over, I have to introduce none others than my own people. Dr. Chaudhary, he is known to me. Dr. Amish Chaudhary, he has worked with me with Max when I'm still with Max, but he has moved to Fortis. So Dr. Amish has more than 21 years of experience, and he is more experienced in gynae oncology, and also he is specialized in HIPEC. So I came to know now only what is HIPEC. It is hyperthermic intraperitoneal chemotherapy. So I would like him to dwell upon the topic. And robotic, we have heard about robotic in surgery, oncosurgery, so many times. But still, every time we learn a few newer things. So Dr. Amish is just like my younger brother. He has been with me with Max, and now that he is at Fortis Vasant Kunj, where one of my very darling family member is working there as an anesthetist. So I would like him to come and give us his talk. Thank you.
यार कुछ तो बंद करवा दे यार, सारी तो मुश्किल है। अरे बंद कर रहे हैं,
आगे वाली सर नीचे से
स्लाइड शो शुरू हो जाए फिर क्या?
नीचे से बंद कर
अभी थोड़ी ये पीछे की बंद कर,
ये पीछे की बंद करवा दे।
यार इसके फिर वही कर रहा तू, ये उनके ऊपर थोड़ी सी लाइट पे।
नहीं सामने वाली तो वही कर दो।
अभी थोड़ी 2 मिनट
रिकॉर्डिंग होगी, YouTube पे जाएगा।
So, good evening friends. So today my topic is robotic hysterectomy. So we started doing robotic surgery in 2015, and initially we were doing 1 or 2 surgeries, and over the years gradually in surgery oncology field the robotics has become well established in robotic hysterectomy, robotic smolarity resection of the rectum, right aneuploiectomies, robotic hysterectomies, robotic esophageectomies, and now even few surgeons have started doing robotic liver section also. So today my topic is robotic hysterectomy. So indication of robotic hysterectomy is carcinoma endometrium, that is uterine cancer, and carcinoma of the cervix, that is the cervical cancer. Okay. And I will be skipping the PPT part. I straight away go to the video section. So the robot uses a Da Vinci Xi, which is currently the most advanced that WC has. It's a 4-arm robot which has boom rotation. That means once you tell it the target organ, the robotic boom automatically rotates into its own position, and there is hardly anything that you have to do manually. The computer itself calculates, and the instruments go into the particular position as per the organ that you have. The video is after the docking. The docking has been done. So in this we start the surgery lateral to the IP ligament. That is also called the ovarian pedicle. So now we are working on the lateral peritoneum. In my right hand is the monopolar scissor, and in my left hand is the bipolar forceps. So in robotic surgery you have to be very slow and very meticulous. The magnification is very high, so you can see even the smaller blood vessels in great detail. So we are trying to develop a plane between the rectum and the pelvic wall. So right now we are developing a plane which is lateral to the ureter. So in CA cervix you have to dissect lateral to the ureter. In CA endometrium you have to dissect medial to the ureters. So we are trying to locate the ureter and the interline leg artery. So we are going to develop a space between the ureter and the interline leg artery. So you can see this is the ureter, and we have opened up the space lateral to the ureter. This one is the ureter, and this one is the interline leg artery. So as we develop the space, the only structure that will cross the ureter is the uterine artery. Now this structure that is going from interline leg artery over the ureter is the uterine artery, and we have fluted at its origin. Now we are going below the uterine artery, and we will carry on this dissection up to the levator ani. Now once that dissection is complete, we will separate the ureter from the medial fascia of the IP ligament. Now we are cutting the round ligament on the left side. We repeat the same process, lateral to the ureter and lateral to the bladder. So now this is the obliterating umbilical artery, and we develop a plane between the rectum and the obliterating umbilical artery and go up to the levator ani in the parapsychic space. Now this space is lateral to the bladder, and in this space we will go up to the levator ani. And now again dissecting the left IP ligament and developing a plane between the interline leg artery and the left ureter. This is the left ureter that is coming into the view, and this is the interline leg artery. Now develop a space between these two, and you will find the uterine artery arching over the ureter. And now connect the parapsychical and the parapectoral space. This one is the ureter plane, this is the internal leg artery, and this entire thing is the uterine artery. And similarly, as we did on the right side, take the ureter of the IP ligament. Now comes the development of the rectovesical space, that is the space between the bladder and the vagina. So in CA cervix, we have to take upper 1/3 of the vagina. So we have to go we have to dissect the bladder completely off the vagina. Most surgeons use blunt dissection, but I generally prefer sharp dissection by scissors because sharp dissection helps the plane to be bloodless. Now we are connecting the rectovaginal spaces to both the parapsychal spaces that we have created initially. Now we lift the uterus anteriorly and separate the rectum and the vagina. Now we are developing the rectovaginal space as low as possible. And now we are cutting the uterosacral ligaments. These are the uterosacral ligaments which are being cut so that we connect both the pararectal spaces with the rectovaginal space. This is classically called connecting the 6 spaces. Now comes the most difficult part of the surgery, that is development of the parametrial canal. The ureter is traveling right through the parametrium. So in this case, we will stop using the sharp energy and we will put in a robotic harmonic. And now we have to completely wear the ureter up to the utrovesical junction where it enters the bladder. And we have to migrate all the tissue, all the parametrium and the paracolpos medially. We have to leave nothing on the lateral pelvic wall. So see, this is the UV junction that we are reaching. Here the ureter enters the bladder. Here it is wide and low. This is the entry of the ureter into the bladder. And we have taken all the parametrium and the paracolpos. This is the entire parametrium and the paracolpos. Parametrium is the soft tissue lateral to the uterus, and paracolpos is the soft tissue lateral to the vagina. And now at this point we will transact the uterine artery. And now it is the same process on the opposite side. So you have to leave nothing on the ureter except its entry and its blood vessel. Every small shred of tissue is migrated medially towards the specimen. Now you can see this is some last part of the paracolpos that is left. So now this is the left UV junction. Here the ureter enters the bladder. Now our dissection is almost complete. And now we will take the cut from the parametrium and the paracolpos, taking every tissue from the lateral pelvic wall with our specimen and leaving nothing behind. Once that part is done, we put a vaginal manipulator inside, dissect the bladder completely off the vaginal wall. This is the vaginal wall with our manipulator inside, and through which we deliver the specimen and the surgery.
You can come here, we will have question and answer. Ma'am.
Very nice talk, sir. Thank you. And we will have talk by Dr. Mitu Shikhande. I don't need to introduce her. We have had talks earlier with her. The last, as Dr. Chauhan has said, it was at Shirwani, I remember. Dr. Prabhas Mishra. He is still my friend, and I am continuously in touch with him to have a CME with him also. So I think I wish you both had joined another CME together, but since you are working at different places, maybe it's difficult. So we are lucky to have you once more. And we all know she is a very senior pathologist, hematologist of 20 years experience, and her MBBS from IFMC Pune, and she had DNB medicine in 2001, then DNB hematology, and experience in hematology is her main strength. So I would like to apprise us what is new for treatment of lymphoma. So we have moved from very rudimentary treatment of lymphoma to the very advanced and targeted treatment for lymphoma. Welcome.
Let's hear it for Dr. Mithushree Pandey.
While we are just putting the slides up, sir, I'm sorry, but I would like to reintroduce myself. I'm not a pathologist, I'm a clinical hematologist. And I think 10 साल के बाद मिल रहे हैं, कब से बिछड़े हुए 10 साल बाद मिल रहे हैं, and I hope next time is not that far.
मैंने डॉक्टर कालरा को बोल दिया मैं कि मैडम हमको हेमाटोलॉजिस्ट है, पैथोलॉजिस्ट नहीं है.
So, very good evening everybody, and a warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Fortis here. We are quite a few, and I just hope that I do justice to the talk today. Dr. Chauhan had asked me to speak on what's new in the treatment landscape of lymphomas. Sir, at the outset I would tell you so much is happening in this space that I further moved on to dissect it to non-Hodgkin's and then to diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, because I wouldn't have done justice otherwise to this talk. So with that note, my numbers are here in case anytime anybody needs any, any query also, you can reach out to me please. Just to see what is the flow of the talk today, I shall be just briefly introducing the various subtypes of non-Hodgkin lymphoma, the current treatment landscape in upfront DLBCL, risk factors for relapse and refractory DLBCL. We'll discuss on the therapeutic options in both transplant eligible and non-transplant eligible relapse refractory DLBCL. We will discuss about some of these new kids on the block, the newer therapies that are there, the ADCs, the antibody drug conjugates, the CAR-T therapy, and the novel agents and the bispecific antibodies, which are actually changing the paradigm of lymphoma management. So, DLBCL is by far the commonest non-Hodgkin's lymphoma among all lymphomas. And if you look at the incidence in India, 25,000 cases of DLBCL, new DLBCL cases are reported every year. So it's a huge burden, and I think this might be not, because a lot of patients are also going unreported. This is the registry data that we have. Now, as I said, diffuse large B-cell lymphoma is the most common non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Approximately 60 to 65% of patients are cured with the standard frontline therapy, which has been for so long R-CHOP. Everyone's heard about it. But we also know that those patients who remain event-free for the first 2 years after their diagnosis do very well, and their overall survivals are in the range of age and sex matched general population. But what happens to the remaining 35 to 40%? These patients may either have a primary refractory disease or they may relapse after an initial response. And these are the patients who do very, very poorly. But in the talk today, I shall begin with something exciting that has happened in the last 2 years in the upfront landscape of lymphoma, DLBCL. That is patients who are treatment naive, who have not been exposed, who are newly diagnosed cases of diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. So this was the standard of care for decades. You would have known CHOP followed by R-CHOP, which became the standard of care in 2002. It was based on this trial which showed about 18 to 20% survival difference, which was maintained over a long time, over several years, between the arm of CHOP and R-CHOP. And that's how R-CHOP changed the treatment landscape of DLBCL. But that was 2 decades ago. This is Reditux, our own first rituximab biosimilar since 2007 in India by Dr. Reddy's lab. And rituximab actually made it possible for us to treat our own patients in an affordable manner, and those patients who could not afford the treatment, Reditux support patient assistance was given by Dr. Reddy's lab. So I could really proudly say that anybody who walks into my clinic, we will make sure that we are able to complete the therapy, because with or without assistance it became possible. Now we know DLBCL is not one disease, it's a very heterogeneous disease. There are many subtypes and it is very convoluted. So R-CHOP does not cure some of the DLBCL subtypes, and so R-CHOP is not enough for some of these patients. Now, to understand what are those patients, if you see a patient who has a low IPI, who has an early disease, has a GCB phenotype, and I think the pathology colleagues over here would barely understand that we do, based on immunohistochemistry, divide it into a GCB and non-GCB phenotype. These are the patients who do well on R-CHOP. But the ones who have a high IPI, elderly patients, non-GCB phenotype, those who have dual protein expression, or who have rearrangement of MYC gene or a DCL2, they are the ones who do not do very well on R-CHOP. So their cure rates are there, but they're not as good as the better risk performers. So this is another schemata to show that 50 to 60% of the patients are cured with R-CHOP. 10 to 15% are refractory, 5% achieve a PR, which is a partial response. And out of the more than 90% who overall respond to R-CHOP, 20 to 30% would still relapse. Now, when do they relapse after treatment? If we see on the right hand side, we see the progression after R-CHOP. We see more than 90% of them would do in the first 5 years. And out of that, 80% would do in the first 3 years. So that's a very close follow-up that you need to maintain. But having said that, if they haven't progressed in the first 5 years, 90% of them are going to do well, and it's only 10% who will relapse after 10 years. Now, whatever be the upfront therapy that you've given, how do you predict that after a relapse, how would they perform on salvage therapy? So if they've been previously exposed to rituximab, or if they have a primary refractory disease, or they have an early relapse within 12 months after the initial therapy, or they have high international prognostic index, or they have a MYC translocation. These are the patients we identify who may have poor results to even salvage therapy. We know in cancer, there's a rule that the first chance is the best chance. So we know that same holds true for DLBCL also. And when we treat a frontline setting DLBCL, 50 to 60% people are getting cured. But the 30 to 40% who either relapse or are refractory, if we put them to a second line therapy, only 5 to 20% will be cured. So after every relapse, the outcomes and the prognosis just keeps worsening. So much so that in the third line setting, we neither have a standard of care and the progression-free survival is just about 7 to 8 months. So it's a problem. Now, as I said, first time is the best time. We were doing our job, we get 60% cure rates, but we want everybody to get all right, right? So all these years, right from 2002, since ARCHOP was established as a standard of care, we have tried and the investigators have done various studies and clinical trials to see if we can optimize ARCHOP better. So what all did we do? We tried to improve the anti-CD20 coverage by adding another monoclonal antibody called obinutuzumab, which is Gazyva. So this was tried, didn't work. We tried adding targeted therapy, adding Len, adding bortezomib, adding ibrutinib, adding bevacizumab to ARCHOP. Would we improve the outcome? No, we didn't. We added more chemotherapy. We added more drugs like etoposide. We escalated the regimen to dose-adjusted EPOCH-R. We tried to give ARCHOP every 14 days instead of 21 days. It didn't work. We said, let's try maintenance. We tried various drugs for maintenance, including rituximab maintenance and DLBCL. It did fail miserably. Nothing proved to be better than ARCHOP. And so it continued for the next 2 decades. And it was only in 2022 that the needle moved in the sphere of upfront diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, where this regimen was found to be superior to ARCHOP in certain settings. And what is this regimen? Pola-R-CHP. What is polatuzumab? Polatuzumab vedotin is an antibody drug conjugate which targets CD79B. What is CD79B? It's a signaling component of the B-cell antigen receptor complex, which is ubiquitously expressed in DLBCL. Now, what does polatuzumab? It is an antibody drug conjugate. So we have the antibody and we have a drug conjugated to it. The drug is a potent microtubule inhibitor, MMAE, and they are conjugated together. So you give the drug IV, the ADC is in circulation, that is the polatuzumab. This goes and binds the CD79B receptor on the B cells of the lymphoma. Subsequently, this ADC receptor complex is internalized. The MMAE, which is the microtubule inhibitor, is released into the lysosomes, causes the disruption of the microtubules, leading to apoptosis and cell death. This was the trial based on which the approvals came. It's POLARIX trial published in NEJM. And what they did was, the ARCHOP was modified where vincristine was replaced by polatuzumab and the rest remained the same. The primary endpoint was PFS, that is progression-free survival, and what they showed was that at 24 months, see the separated curves, 76.7 pola-R-CHP, PFS, and 70.2 in ARCHOP. So there was a 6.5% improvement in the PFS with pola-R-CHP. What we also found was that those patients who received pola-R-CHP required less subsequent lymphoma therapies. Now this is shown here. If you compare the blue, which is the ARCHOP, and green, which is pola-R-CHP, any treatment, radiotherapy, systemic therapy, stem cell transplant, RT cell, everything was lower in the pola-R-CHP. But when we look at the overall survival curves over a prolonged time of 39 months, 40 months, we don't see any much difference. So the difference is only in progression-free survival. This is the current treatment landscape. To split it further, whenever we have a patient who is relapsed or is refractory, we want to divide that patient into transplant eligible or transplant ineligible. And based on that, we choose a salvage regimen, because some of the regimens can be stem cell toxic and you don't want to do that in a setting of autologous stem cell transplant. Now, if we were to deal with a transplant eligible patient of relapsed refractory DLBCL, the single most important factor that I would like to highlight is the survival is dependent upon the relapse. That's the single most important factor. So if they've had an early relapse in less than 12 months, the OS at 3 years is just 39% compared to 64% if they relapse after 12 months. Now there are several chemoimmunotherapy, but ideal flow chart for such patients would be if there's a primary refractory or early relapse, and it's an early relapse, less than 12 months after the first therapy, ideal therapy in the date of today would be CAR T cells. If that fails, then we can go on to the transplant arm. But if it is after 12 months, then these patients, if they are fit, we can take them for a salvage regimen followed by a transplant. If they fail a transplant, then we can move to CAR T cell therapy. What about the transplant ineligible patients? In this setting, we would go on to chemoimmunotherapy like R-GemOx, or we can go to a ADC plus chemotherapy like a polatuzumab with bendamustine rituximab, or we can go to the chemo-free regimens, which is tafasitamab along with lenalidomide. If there is a failure of the second line, then we can proceed to CAR T or any other therapy which has not been tried in the past. These are some of the novel agents: monoclonal antibodies, antibody-drug conjugates, CAR T, oral agents. Polatuzumab I've already described. Before it got approved in the upfront setting, polatuzumab was approved 2-3 years before the upfront setting. It was approved in the relapse refractory setting, as happens with all the drugs. So this is a trial showing phase 2 randomized trial of BR versus Pola-BR, and this is the basis for showing that the PFS and OS is much better when you combine Pola with BR versus only chemotherapy with rituximab. And this is to be considered in patients who are not eligible for transplant or CAR T cells as second line, or as a bridging therapy if you want to do a CAR T cell therapy. This trial led to the approval in 2019, 3 years before upfront approval of Pola-BR in relapsed refractory DLBCL after failure of 2 lines of therapy. This is another drug very promising, tafasitamab. It's a monoclonal antibody to CD19, which is again expressed on B cells when it's combined with the oral drug lenalidomide. And what this trial shows is that, again, very important, the median duration of response is 43.9 months. Overall response rate 58%. Very, very interesting, and I think this drug also got approval in 2020 on an accelerated basis for patients with relapsed refractory DLBCL who were not eligible for autologous transplant. This is another antibody drug conjugate, loncastuximab. Now, how do we choose which novel therapy to give? So this is governed by the previous treatment status or what we want to do in the future and some patient factors. So if you're planning a CAR T, then you can bridge with a Pola-BR. And similarly, if you have a side effect like neuropathy, you would not go for polatuzumab. I think how many of us get intrigued by what is immunotherapy? So just to set a context to it, what is immunotherapy? So to understand, we have to understand in healthy individuals, the host immune system is playing a central role in the prevention of cancer by identifying the self and the foreign antigens, and thereby it can eliminate the malignant cells. Now in malignancies, there is evasion of the immune system, there is alteration of the surface antigen expression on the cells, and sometimes T cell exhaustion as a part of the malignancy or as a part of previous treatment. So there is an evasion of the immune system. Now suppose we were to do novel effective immune modulation directed by adoptive cellular therapy and immune cell targeted monoclonal antibodies, we can overcome this. This is what is immunotherapy. And the important thing is to understand what is adoptive cellular therapy. It's immunotherapy that involves ex vivo manipulation of autologous T cells followed by their reinfusion. Now this makes the T cells very empowered, and they are like missiles producing immune mediated tumor response. Now, CAR T cell therapy is a form of adoptive cell transfer immunotherapy, and I think everybody must have been hearing about CAR T cell therapy. So just a schema to give you an idea what is CAR T cell therapy. So you remove the autologous T cells from an individual, you take these to the lab where you are introducing a CAR gene into the cell, T cells. This CAR T cell I will explain later. Now you introduce a CAR into the T cell and subsequently you culture it, and these CAR T cells grow into millions. And once they are adequate enough, they are brought back. So this is called vein to vein time. That means you've taken the T cells of that patient, done all the genetic engineering outside, put the CAR, grown it later, and now you are reinfusing these CAR T cells intravenously into the patient. What do they go and do? They are very empowered. They are missiles now. They are live cells. They are live drug rather. And they go and attach to the tumor antigens, cause T cell activation and kill it. These are the CD19 directed CAR T cells available internationally. 3 approved therapies: Axicell, Tisacell and Mesocell. What is a CAR T? This is the CAR. That is the chimeric antigen receptor. It has 3 parts. There is an extracellular domain, which is the antigen binding domain, which is going to recognize the cancer cell. Then there is an in-between transmembrane domain, which is a hinge. And then we have the intracellular domain, which also has a co-stimulatory domain. And this is what is basically doing the T cell activation and entire firing. So what we are trying to do is give a live drug and confer direct antigen specificity to an autologous cytotoxic T cell to go and kill the cancer cells. So you're playing with immunity. What are the pros? Single infusion, no need for immune suppression or risk of GVHD. Cons, potential costs, supportive care management, and the transition of care involvement. These are the 3 approved CD19 targeted cell therapies, and you'll be happy to know, and I'm sure you're reading, that we have 2 indigenously produced CAR Ts in India, which have been produced in India. And they are now being used commercially, and we have good data which is comparable to the international ones, and they're doing well. We need to see the long-term follow-up, and then we are going ahead with them, and the costs are literally 1/8 for what is it internationally. So promising future, but there are some disadvantages to the auto CAR T cells. There is a lot of, like as I said, vein to vein. In India, the CAR T cell manufacturing process takes 25 days. So there's a production time. Sometimes patients don't have that much time. There is a logistic involvement, there is cost. In India, as I said, it costs 30 lakhs, whereas internationally it's about 3 to 4 crores. There is a manufacturing delay, and sometimes you can have manufacturing failures because everything depends on the fitness of the patient's T cells, and these could be deceased and they could be exposed to previous treatment, so we can have challenges there. So ideal would be if we had a universal off-the-shelf allogenic CAR T cells. This could be a good alternative. It could potentially overcome these issues, allow multiple modifications and CAR combinations to target multiple tumor antigens and avoid tumor escape. So you could target many antigens on the cancer cell, why just one? This could be very quick, very efficacious, more accessible, but since you're giving somebody else's cells, there could be a potential risk of GVHD, that is graft versus host disease, or host allo rejection. But the important thing is that we are making great advances in the gene editing tools like CRISPR, and I think in the future there's a good promise of having off-the-shelf allogenic CAR T cells where we will be able to bypass the major histocompatibility complex and prevent GVHD with the allogenic CAR T cells. These are some of the CAR T trials: Zuma 1, Zuma 7, Transform trials. And what do they show? That up to 65% to 66% of complete responses can be seen. And they seem very promising. So in the current era, what is the treatment algorithm for CAR T cell therapy as second line management of relapsed refractory DLBCL? I would say time from first line therapy. If it is less than 12 months, then the patient should be taken. It's an early relapse, then you should do CAR T cell. And with CAR T cell, people will respond to the tune of 80% also, but eventually 20% patients will get cured. If they are not eligible for CAR T, then we can move to second, third line options or other options. If the patient has relapsed more than 1 year after receiving the last therapy, then this could be the case for autologous transplant. So if the patient is eligible, we go ahead giving a salvage regimen, which is usually platinum based, followed by conditioning regimen and autologous transplant. If we do this arm, we finally see good responses, but finally we will see only 5% of the long-term cure with autologous transplant as well. Those who are not fit for either of the two will go for the rest of the therapies which we have discussed and will be discussing. But there are notable CAR T cell toxicities as well. Every good thing, there are no free lunches, so everything comes with a tag, right? So what are the possible problems? CRS, which is cytokine release syndrome. You can have neurological type toxicity with ICANS, prolonged cytopenias, B cell aplasia, hypogammaglobulinemia. As we have been having more and more literature, we become wiser, having products causing less CRS, less ICANS, and managing them better. Most of these require admission to ICU. If there is CRS, usually response with supportive care and tocilizumab. If there is neurotoxicity with CRS, again, we need tocilizumab with ICU care and supportive care. Otherwise, we go ahead and give solumetrol or dexamethasone. Most of the times it settles down, but it can be potentially lethal as well. These are some of the other drugs. This is a very interesting oral drug. The trial to show its benefit. Then we have very interesting, which is one of my favorites, is bispecific antibodies. Now, what are bispecific antibodies? Now, you have to imagine they are also called as bispecific T-cell engager or BiTEs. So, what are they? Monoclonal antibodies with biarm. So, we have now two arms, and you can see it in some of these, all of them are biarms. And one of these arms will go and bind the antigen binding site on the cancer cell, and the other one will go and bind the T cell. So it's like a missile now. Your GPS directed missile. You are tagging it. So you are getting one to bind T cell, which is going to kill cytotoxic T cell, and the other is binding the antigen on the tumor cell. Now I typically tell my patients in Hindi, ki pakad ke marenge. So you get the T cells in proximity to the tumor cell, activate the T cells, and they will cause a lysis of the cancer cell. So these are some of the antibodies which are there in the DLBCL and lymphomas NHL space. This is mosunetuzumab, which is approved in follicular lymphoma, glofitamab in DLBCL. We have, this is a very promising antibody, odronextamab, which is getting in patients with follicular lymphoma. You have response rates of 90% with median duration of response not reached. So very, very interesting. And hopefully I will be giving you updates much sooner, and it won't be a 10-year gap now. Novel therapies, we come with no free lunches as well. They also have toxicities, like Pola can have peripheral neuropathy to infectious complications. Others can have other complications which are specific. We need to monitor for them. They are all manageable, and these drugs are doable. But right now we only have polatuzumab in India. So a very rapidly evolving phase of relapsed refractory DLBCL is what we have seen. We have moved in first line from R-CHOP to Pola RCHP in certain patients. We have moved CAR-T from third line and fourth line to second line now in patients who have early relapse. We have autologous CAR-T now. In the future, we will be thinking of off-the-shelf allogeneic CAR-T cell. We have bispecific agents, novel agents. We have many other therapies. In the future, we have tri-specific agents also. So we will have 3 arms, and 2 will will be directed to 2 antigens of the tumor cell and 1 to the T cell. So we cause better hit and better kill. So the future is interesting, bright, and there's lots in the pipeline. But despite all this, with all this, we have newer and different kind of challenges. There are issues of drug accessibility because many of these drugs are still not available in our country. But we have those patients who are eligible. So some of the clinical trials take them up, but most often we have problems where we do not have clinical trials also. We have to keep the spirit of personalized care in this era of precision oncology, but the costs are huge, and these have to be deliberated in a social economic fabric of our country. And what is important is we need to balance the need and the preferences of the individual, keeping all of this in mind. Thank you so much for your patience.
Ma'am, please come here. We apologize for introducing you as a pathologist. Man, you are a wonderful, wonderful oncohematologist. We know that.
सर ये तो मेरा प्रेरोगेटिव है
सर आपका प्रेरोगेटिव है, लेकिन आपने
डेफिनेटली आई वांट टू से
आपको ही करेक्ट करना है.
मुझे करने तो दो सर.
करिए.
दिस इज माय अनकंडीशनल अपोलॉजी. मैं उस जमाने का हूँ जब फिजिशियन और सर्जन हुआ करते थे, और सर्जन होते थे बस वो सारी सर्जरी कर लेते थे. फिजिशियन होते थे वो सारी चीज़ का इलाज कर लेते हैं. फिर कार्डियोलॉजिस्ट आ गए, फिर कार्डियोलॉजिस्ट में इंटरवेंशनलिस्ट और ऑपरेशनल बाकी अलग हो गए. एंड सो पार्डन मी, आई हैव labeled you wrongly pathologist, but broadly you are hematopathologist.
She's an oncohematologist.
Oncohematopathologist. जहाँ पैथोलॉजी नहीं है वहाँ
She is not a pathologist. She is not a pathologist.
oncohematologist, clinical hemato-oncologist. आने वाले टाइम में मैं आपको ये बताना चाहता हूँ कि राइट आई और लेफ्ट आई के सर्जन अलग होंगे. Mark my point. My apology, and I will ask less questions because of I have wasted time. My simple question, rather a remark and a lighter thing. Bispecific antibodies, are they kind of T cell jihad?
T cell?
Jihad. जैसे love jihad है, पकड़ के बैठा दिया और शादी कर ली.
They are basically engaging and activating the T cells to kill the tumor cells. So, yeah.
I think मैंने थोड़ा सा तो लाइट कर दिया. Well, will there be any healthy T cell donors in future to help others?
Yeah, so when we are talking of allogenic CAR T cells, that's what I did not put that slide here, but you have a healthy donor, you take the T cells from the healthy donor, and then you grow them, and you put the CAR T construct in that, and you have to still engineer them so that they have a directed thing. But yeah, that can, but what comes is, the challenge is that once you give somebody else's cells, there will be a risk of graft versus host disease. So to overcome that, we will have to do gene editing, which I think in due time, that will come. That is already happening.
Dr. Kalda sir, Dr. Savita Sachdeva ma'am, who is actually a pathologist, wants to make a comment.
Yeah.
No. I was just adding there, hematologists can be after doing pathology also and after doing medicine also. I was adding when the controversy was being regarding being internal medicine.
If I tell you, to do DM hematology, you can be MD in pathology, MD in pediatrics, or MD in medicine.
Great.
I did MD medicine, and I'm just correcting for myself.
Yes sir. And Dr. Kalda sir has already admitted the mistake, and you need to pardon us. You need to pardon us. Sir, please go ahead. Dr. Kalda sir, go ahead sir.
Yeah. So I will rather open the session for questions. My all friends.
Dr. Sen Gupta has a question. I'll just come with Dr. Podar sir.
I don't have a question, ma'am. It was a wonderful presentation. I just need your slide deck. How do I get it?
It's been recorded, sir. It'll be in YouTube now. But happy to share.
Yeah, I'll share my mail ID and I'll just talk back to you later. Thank you.
Yeah, you can be in touch with the ma'am and you can get it. Dr. Podar sir.
So, Dr. Mithul, basically CAR T cell therapy is enabling a patient's T lymphocyte to fight the cancer cells, malignant cells. So is it specific for the patient, or is it ready-made solution? Or do you take patient's blood then prepare Carticel for the patient, or is it a ready-made injection available?
So right now it is not off the shelf, it is done for a patient with his own T cells which are taken, engineered in the lab, grown and then again given. So it's an ex vivo manipulation and growth that we do in the lab.
So patient blood will be taken, and then I have heard that Dr. Reddy's lab is coming with
So
Carticel
Dr.
therapy.
Reddy's lab is coming up with CAR-T for myeloma and it's expected to be there by December.
So they will take patient blood, then they will.
We are
prepare.
already doing for lymphoma in India. We have 2 products, 2 companies doing it. One is ImmunoAct and the other one is Immune. They are already there in India.
So this will cost 30 lakhs for the whole therapy.
30 lakh is not for the whole therapy, that is only to produce the product. The treatment costs are separate. So all in all, it works out to be around 50 lakhs, 45 to 50 lakhs, depending on the
Right,
complications.
thank you.
I have one question. Is there some role of radiation in this diffuse large B-cell lymphoma? Radiation.
So yes, if we have a patient with a diffuse large B-cell lymphoma with a bulky disease, and we do stage them at the end of therapy, if there is a residual disease, then we do radiation. Radiation is not done as the primary therapy, it is with chemotherapy as an adjunct, if it is required.
Then how much is you see benefit from R-CHOP therapy in this DLBCL lymphoma?
So how much is the benefit? Yeah, so 60 to 70% patients will be cured. 30 to 35% are those who have either a refractory, which is about 15% patients, or they will have a refractory disease, means they relapse or they are refractory. So 30 to 35% will have relapse refractory, 60 to 70 will get cured.
Kindly introduce yourself.
I am Dr. Rajesh Dey. I just wanted to ask, like, for physicians.
Your specialty.
I am a liver transplant surgeon.
All right, go ahead.
In mind. So, how do you suspect that a patient has lymphoma? They don't come to, I mean, you are a specialist, when a patient walks in, you can identify. But
So the lymphoma patient never comes to me. It comes mostly as a diagnosis because they present with lymphadenopathy, or they can present with splenomegaly, or they can come with B symptoms like fever, weight loss, night sweats. So they can present as a PUO. And mind you, the lymphomas may not be just nodal, they can be extranodal, and lymphomas can come in any organ. So we've seen organs like kidney, adrenal, breast, ovary, testes, brain, lung, eye. So
And liver?
yeah, it can come in any organ.
Liver transplant.
And intestines, gastric,
Liver
every
transplant
place.
surgeon.
Yeah. So I think as a liver transplant surgeon, what you need to bother is about post-transplant lymphoproliferative disorder. So PTLD is a problem post-transplant.
That we get sometimes, they come with lymph nodes, but in general, I wanted to know, okay, when we suspect a patient is not
Yeah,
doing
so lymphadenopathy and B symptoms, and then any organ, it depends on what the biopsy shows, but it can be kept as a DD in everything.
I would like to interject just for a second with permission from Dr. Kalra sir. Yeah, Sarath, we will come to you. Ma'am, on your routine diagnosis in your lab, do you pick up lymphomas on peripheral spheres?
Yeah.
And what is that
Actually,
suspicion? What do you see that you tell the clinician, kindly look for lymphoma?
Actually, for lymphoma, I get like lymphadenopathy. TB is the most common, but we got cases of like, cannot say, we just say lymphoproliferative disease. This can be done further by that flow cytometry and all that are suggested. At OPD level, we can just suggest flow cytometry there. From there, the diagnosis of NHL, HL and other things. HL can be got by the Reed-Sternberg cells, but flow cytometry can be done by the lymph node aspirate. And in peripheral smear, yes, we can say the leukemic cells are there, but once it is in the blood, then it is either a stage 4 because it has come in the blood, and either it is a leukemia or a lymphoma stage 4. So accordingly, one has to discuss with the patient regarding that and look at all the symptoms the patient is having.
Dr. Savita ma'am, for the benefit of everyone here, I would like to relate a case. My close relative who had lymph nodes, big lymph nodes here, and his daughter works in Kalavati Hospital. This gentleman happened to be my relative. And ma'am, he was shown to an ENT surgeon. Kindly, just 5 minutes, please listen to this. It's very interesting, and I would like to have input from ma'am, Dr. Savita ma'am, and then Dr. Meetu ma'am. But this is very, very interesting and very educative. Just the journey of this patient. He had very big lymph nodes. I think I measured it, and one lymph node was 5 centimeters by 7 centimeters, and there were multiple lymph nodes, and they looked like matted lymph nodes. So I told my, this happened to be my cousin, I told them, show him to your hospital and get an ENT examination. And also he had some issues with his throat ongoing for about a month. He was shown to an ENT person in Lady Harding, and they found ulcerated tonsils bilaterally. So they said, we are not going to biopsy the tonsils, we will just take samples from here. They took biopsy from here, ma'am, and their histopathology department in Lady Harding took a lot of time, and they said there is a eosinophilic predominance on the peripheral smear, and they did not see any Reed-Sternberg cells, and they said that this looks like to be infection, some sort of infection with eosinophilic predominance. So they said biopsy it and submit it for immunohistochemistry. After immunohistochemistry, the diagnosis was Hodgkin's lymphoma. So obviously, ma'am, they were worried. They asked me where to go, so I told them to go to BLK because it was on CGHS panel. And I went to Dr. Dharma Chaudhary myself with them, and he said we would like to review the slides. Their slides were reviewed in BLK Max by multiple doctors. Some doctors saw Reed-Sternberg cells, some did not see Reed-Sternberg cells, and they said no, we are not sure what it is. So treat it as lymphoma. Dr. Dharma Chaudhary said no, I am not going to treat it as. So ma'am, there is supposed to be the ultimate person in Mumbai for lymphomas. I forgot the name. The slides were submitted.
Dr. Jay Mehta?
No. Jay Mehta's boss. No, it's a lady. Dr. Anita Borges. Dr. Anita Borges. No, I'm just telling it for everyone's this thing, for education. Dr. Anita Borges, ma'am, she charged 9,000 rupees for the immunohistochemistry. Ma'am, she did not give any opinion, so I spoke to somebody in Delhi, and he said, no, I'll speak to Jay Mehta, he knows her very well, her junior. So we spoke to Dr. Jay Mehta, I spoke to him myself. He said, okay doctor, after a lot of deliberations, I think your relative seems to have reactive lymphoid hyperplasia. They called it marginal cell lymphoma. They called it marginal cell lymphoma. Marginal cell lymphoma. So again, the word lymphoma, it worried them. So we went to AIMS. In AIMS, they were again, evaluated. Again, a lymphoid biopsy was done. Immunohistochemistry was done. They said reactive lymphadenitis. Those lymph nodes have gone back. There is nothing. They are all disappeared. They are all disappeared. Reed-Sternberg cells were seen in BLK Max. I will not name the pathologist.
No sir, they might not be wrong because sometimes the Reed-Sternberg cells are seen in tuberculosis and many other conditions also. It is
no ATT was given. No ATT was given.
But in many other conditions also, it is not a very good type of, but a very ill-defined type of RSL might be seen in other conditions.
So what I am saying is that at times it is not that simple a diagnosis. Sir, I am coming to you.
So first of all, if there is a suspicion of lymphoma, there is no role of FLS. We need excision biopsy. If the node is too big and we can't remove, we do a true cut biopsy. biopsy in that situation, ideally an excision biopsy. Now the moment we've done a FNSE, we disturb the architecture for the biopsy. So that probably plays around later. Secondly, the diagnosis of lymphomas can be one of the very complicated ones. There are many other mimickers like Castleman's disease, Kikuchi syndrome, and tuberculosis in our country. There can be coexistence, there can be multiple things, and you can sort of opinions are required.
That's what I'm saying, ma'am. That at times things are not simple.
I will also tell you that we had last year we had a patient which was such a which we call as discordant lymphoma. Now this lady presented to me with these symptoms and thrombocytopenia, and then we finally made a diagnosis of lymphoma. But as we were doing the workup, the bone marrow showed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and the lymph node showed a Hodgkin's lymphoma. So at the same time, in the same patient, we had Hodgkin's in the node and non-Hodgkin's in the bone marrow. And this is very well recorded. So lymphomas can play a lot of tricks.
Dr. Poddar sir.
She has already told there is absolutely no role of FNSE in diagnosis of lymphoma. Only diagnosis of lymphoma is by histopathology, and preferably, as she said, you have to take out the whole lymph node, not even look at biopsy. Preferably the excision biopsy, the complete lymph node should be taken out for diagnosis of lymphoma. It has to, you note the subtypes of lymphoma also by taking out the whole lymph node.
Just to interject for a second, the patient that you mentioned, where lymph node showed something else and the other bone marrow showed something else, how do you treat this patient? As non-Hodgkin's or as Hodgkin's?
So very interesting, but if you look at the treatment in patients who are not fit for ABVD, which is the Hodgkin's frontline therapy, CHOP is a recommended regimen. So whenever this is there, we treat the first one, which is the non-Hodgkin's anyway with R-CHOP.
Dr. Sarath Gopalan.
Dr. Neetu, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I'm somehow possibly the odd one out of the group. I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist. I'm not an adult person. But we have a patient who's 10.5 years old, admitted with us right now, and we have multiple people. You may be aware of Dr. Nandini Hazarika. Yes. She's managing.
Okay.
We have a pediatrician who's the primary consultant, I'm involved, and we have an immunologist involved.
Okay.
The problem is, this child has had fever for almost 7 weeks, not resolving to enter treatment. The entry treatment was given, Vidal was positive, with us Vidal is negative. And in between, when the treatment was given, the lips were just getting dry, and the tongue was strawberry colored. They diagnosed Kawasaki.
Okay.
They gave immunoglobulin. And after that, it didn't respond. They gave steroids, omnipotent. So, at the end of the day, today, how I came to the picture was the liver enzymes were 750 SPOT and 1080 SPP. So, I got a
Okay. Okay.
I mean, I was not a family consultant, but I got a rescue. And all the viral and autoimmune markers are negative. What we are suspecting right now is something called macrophage activation syndrome, which you may be well aware of. The viral was positive outside.
Your questions are quickly.
Yes, quickly. In Ghaziabad, the viral was positive. Today it's negative. So what does this child possibly have? Is it
So it's hard for me to say like this, but yes, a child with mucocutaneous involvement, rash, etc. and these symptoms could be Kawasaki, and that has been managed. But they can be forerunners to lymphoma, so we need to be 100%
they
sure.
respond to the treatment for Kawasaki, neither immunoglobulins nor steroid.
Okay, so then we need to look for a lymphoma, but as we said, macrophage
So
activation
this is the best site. This is the best site for looking for lymphoma.
You can do a PET scan.
Axillary lymph node.
Do a PET scan. Whatever is lighting up well and is most accessible should be the choice. Now, the other thing is that the macrophage activation is a term very particularly specifically used to patients who have autoimmune disorder like rheumatoid arthritis. In other settings, we would refer it to as HLH. This could be a case of LCH also.
So the viral and autoimmune markers both are negative.
So EBV should be looked at.
Thank you.
Sir, Dr. Amish, since sir, आप सो तो नहीं गए? सर आपने बहुत अच्छा हमें एक्चुअली हम सर्जन नहीं हैं, गायनेकोलॉजिस्ट भी नहीं हैं और somehow we have interest in seeing beautiful videos you showed. बहुत अच्छा लगा. तो मैं ये सोच रहा था ये जो हम पैरामीट्रियम बोलते हैं और जैसे is it something like peritoneum or it is different than peritoneum?
It is soft connective tissue. Peritoneum is
yeah, it's not a loop. It's simply a connective tissue. Just differentiating from the outer, जैसे pericardium है उससे बाहर की बात है जैसे.
नहीं.
It's not. It's just a connective tissue. Right, sir. Right. Thank you.
I'm sure Dr. Podar would be having a question to Dr. Amish.
Dr. Amish, I think will not, it is already very late. Should we continue? No, my only question is, suppose cancer cervix, we see now less number of cases. So do you do robotic in all cases of cancer cervix? Who can afford it? Up to stage 1. And in cancer uterus, endometrial, every case it is useful. Those who can afford it. Those who can't afford it, you would like to do laparoscopic or open surgery? Open surgery, no laparoscopic. You have to go in the depth of the pelvis. So in the depth of pelvis, robotic surgery is very useful. Otherwise, laparoscopic it's very difficult. You either do open or robotic in the depth of pelvis. Okay, thank you.
I will go to Dr. Tulsi sir for some quick questions, both to Dr. Meetu ma'am. And sir, you have a question? Yeah, Dr. Nigam sir.
I just wanted to say regarding your case.
Keep it like this, sir. Keep it like this.
The extreme, on one end you have the normal diagnosis in routine and a malignancy on the
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I just want to mention about Rapoport, who was Rapoport lymphoma expert. So he had mentioned that it is such a common thing, but he says no pathologists live long enough to become infallible in the diagnosis of lymphoma.
Absolutely.
So
Fantastic. Fantastic.
So that he said about maybe 60, 80 years, 100 years back, which is still true in your case.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you for your comment. Dr. Tulsi sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chauhan. I wonder if I have the time to ask some questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, to Dr. Savita, genomic profiling versus molecular profiling. We know it's not the same. The genomic profiling looks for genes and their mutations, while the molecular profiling encompasses a broader range of molecular information, including gene expression, protein expression, and other cellular markers. Talk us about these two.
Sequencing, ma'am.
So someday I'll take a lecture on that. But here we have to ask questions from the two speakers here.
Go ahead, sir.
Let me say, Dr. Meetu and Dr. Amish, they were really nice talks. I learned a lot. So to start with, Dr. Meetu. So, Calquence, the latest BTK inhibitor, the only BTK inhibitor probably approved for MCL, that's the mantle cell lymphoma. It's a very aggressive form of NHL. Talk us about this. How effective is this?
It's very effective. In fact, not only mantle cell, we are using it in Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia, which is LPL, lymphoplasmacytic lymphoma, and with a single drug we are doing very well even in CLL. So there is a calibrutinib and there is a glutinib and now there is picantroprid. There are other drugs, zanubrutinib, many other generations have come and they are wonderful set of drugs. In this setting, mantle cell, in patients with LPL and CLL, DLBCL. They have changed the treatment.
So, we know the gene therapy is very costly. We know the gene therapy is very costly. I am referring to the Jorgensen SMA, which we use in SMA, spinal muscular atrophy. It costs 17 crores for a single dose. What about here? What about the gene therapy in lymphomas? They are so costly.
So when the allogenic CAR T cells come, they will require gene editing. Right now in lymphoma space, no, but otherwise in sickle cell and thalassemia and hemophilia, we are looking at gene therapies.
Right. So, finally, how often do you talked a little about the CRS, how often do you see that? Probably during the initial first stage that you see?
Yeah, so in the first 24 to 48 hours is when you see CRS, you don't only see with CAR T cells, you also see with bites. Because anything that is immunotherapy, that you are engaging the T cell activation, CRS can be seen. And it's fairly common.
Talk us a little about the lymphoma vaccine which are still in clinical trials. Is there any future for that?
Future is there for everything. Right now we are moving leaps and bounds, but vaccine is still far.
My last question to you is regarding the BRCA2 mutations. Either of you, BRCA2 mutations, triple, 3 times or 5 times seen more when you have in lymphomas.
Okay, so BRCA mutations are seen in lymphomas and they are seen in extranodal and patients with breast lymphomas. And
Especially if you have a family history of BRCA2 mutation.
Yes.
Thank you, madam.
I think we had some great question answer sessions, 2 wonderful sessions by Dr. Meetu ma'am and Dr. Amish Chaudhary, and we have the medical oncologist from Fortis, Dr. Nitin. If you could just come here, because I'm going to wind it up, and I will like to have the final word from my moderators, 2 moderators, 1 panelist, Dr. Savita ma'am. Dr. Savita ma'am, first to you. Ma'am, what's your carry home message for us?
We have got to see great videos from Dr. Amish, and that was really an insight into how you take the robotic surgery, how you do the robotic surgery. And because we all are just 20-30 years, we have the vision of that 20-30-year-old, and we are just afraid of going into robotic. But when we see in the videos here, we can suggest our patient as well as any near and dears to go for that. And Dr. Meetu, thank you so much for such a detailed therapies I hope more therapies have come, because I lost my father 5 years back for DLBCL only. Then we had only this R-CHOP. So I really hope that newer therapies come real fast, so that many patients can be saved. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Savita ma'am, for being here and for doing the honors on my last minute request. Dr. Amal Palda sir, our teacher, physician forum in Redwood Pillar, to say the final words for whatever he wants to say, and he wants us to carry home some important points from Dr. Meetu's ma'am and Dr. Manish Chaudhary sir's presentation.
Great talks and very nice interaction. So take home is, whenever we have any case which is related to hematology, we have our best person just by my side, and we are very good friends, and we will have her talk very soon, where I will introduce her much better. Thank you so much.
No problem, sir. We are all humans and we have our memories and graces.